Wow! Incredible!
Professional wrestling is an ever-changing industry. It's a business, no, an art form that demands constant evolution. More often than not, wrestlers don't immediately land on the character that ultimately defines their careers. Many of our favorite wrestlers of all time endured years of growing pains, stratospheric rises, and a bewildering series of creative choices from the minds of both the talent themselves as well as booking masterminds of wrestling writers' rooms and oftentimes the infamously unhinged imagination of Vince McMahon himself. Wrestling at its core is the art of transformation, and few careers illustrate that process more completely than the story of Glenn Jacobs, better known to the world as the Big Red Machine, Kane. One of the most enduring and visually striking figures in WWE history. What makes Jacobs' career uniquely fascinating is not merely the success of Kane the character, but the sheer number of identities that Jacobs himself had to don before the radical transformation that followed. Before becoming known for generations as Kane, Jacobs spent years cycling through gimmicks that failed to connect with audiences. His first WWF run cast him as an unnamed dental associate of Jerry the King Lawler, later revealed to be the cornily named Isaac Yankem DDS. In that new generation era of the Fed, most characters leaned heavily into cartoonish villainy, so Jacobs did everything that he could to be a good soldier, become trusted in the locker room, improve in the ring, and work his way into the good graces of higher brass. Clearly, our future brother of destruction currently lacked the mystique or menace that would later define his career. The audience never accepted the Isaac Yankem gimmick, which was quietly Old Yellered after a South African tour in 1996. Jacobs' next brief yet memorable role was when he was spitefully cast as Fake Diesel, a replacement for Kevin Nash after Nash had left for WCW, which that gimmick was clearly cooked on entry, and Jacobs was once again left without a viable identity. At this stage of his career, there were serious doubts about whether he would have a televised wrestling career any longer. His trajectory completely changed in 1997 with the debut of Kane. Through a series of vignettes and the chilling oratory skills of the late great Paul Bearer, Jacobs was finally introduced as the Undertaker's presumed dead brother at In Your House, Bad Blood. Kane was presented not as a man, but as a Jason Voorhees-esque force. He was given a special mask that has left a stain in the nightmares of millennials and Gen Z for a lifetime. Lore-wise, his mask was initially the result of full-body burns, leaving him permanently scarred, which was later retconned to being mental scars in Kane's mind, reminiscent of the likes of Dr. Doom. Kane was silent from years of trauma, being alone and forgotten, and presumably burned vocal cords somehow. Maybe that's just headcanon that I falsely remember over the years, but Jacobs finally acquired an identity and gimmick worth remembering. He was now the living embodiment of fire and vengeance. This version of Kane succeeded precisely because it stripped away everything that had failed in Jacobs' career before. Initially, there was no comedy, no insulting the audience's intelligence, and most importantly, the story allowed the audience to easily invest in him for the first time in his career. Kane's mystique was his power. This only further slingshotted him into the upper echelon of the WWF by eternally tying him with The Undertaker and his lore. A man defined by career evolution and reinvention himself until the very end, allowed for the Fed to create a character in Kane who felt inevitable and now was only being unleashed to terrorize the World Wrestling Federation. Kane immediately became one of the most protected monsters of the era. Over time, however, WWF began to do something unusual with Kane's character. They humanized him. Through Paul Bearer's ongoing storyline with Undertaker, Kane developed emotional depth. Over the years, he learned how to speak and a warped sense of loyalty to various partners. However, the monster became tragic rather than purely destructive. And once that evolution had reached a peak, in the spirit of reinvention in 2003, Kane was forced to unmask. When Kane removed his mask, he symbolically marked the collapse of the mythos and aura he had built up over the years during the burgeoning internet era, back when Kayfabe truly meant something, in favor of a beautifully frightening psychological instability. Freshly unmasked Kane was somehow more terrifying than his masked predecessor. He became volatile, capable of levels of cruelty that felt personal to each of his victims, rather than the supernatural force he represented before. Kane was now unleashed in a new font once again. This version of Kane no longer was searching for identity or struggling with his past. He had accepted his role, and he was perfectly cast. The character became more controlled, more deliberate, and less chaotic at times, almost like the Joker going through his phases of focused super sanity. Kane functioned as a high-level antagonist in the recently renamed World Wrestling Entertainment, as a credible enough villain to headline major programs, but not special enough to hold the WWE title longer than the average night with Katie Vick. If you know, you know. At this point, Kane had transformed from a horror attraction into a company institution. That institutional quality became explicitly leveraged into the Corporate Kane era. He had aligned himself with the Authority, Triple H, Seth Rollins, and my GOAT Jamie Noble, and I guess Joey Mercury was there too. Kane now served as a corporate enforcer who carried out orders with bureaucratic efficiency. The brilliance of the gimmick laid in its contrast and meta joke on his position in the WWE locker room as well. The monster had not disappeared, but it had evolved seamlessly, just as the company did over the span of his lengthy career. Kane was no longer the symbol of chaotic evil. His life force eroded over time into a systematic institutional power instead. When seen in this light, Glenn Jacobs' eventual transition into real-world politics feels less like a departure from sports entertainment, but more like the final stage of his gimmick evolution. The joke writes itself: a brolic, demonic, mask-wearing, unhinged boogeyman becomes a Republican politician. But I digress. After the Corporate Kane story had run its course, Kane would eventually don the mask again. He ended up having a banger feud with John Cena, centered around Cena embracing the hate, and then he ended up forming one of the greatest thrown together tag teams of all time, Team Hell No, with Daniel Bryan. Their therapy session story is one of the greatest segments of all of the PG era. Glenn Jacobs' career, taken as a whole, is a perfect first case study in why I love reinvention in pro wrestling. It spotlights the failures, the glitz and glamour of superstardom, the kinks and quirks in between, and most importantly, the reality of the performer behind the mask itself. Kane did not simply adapt to the changing landscape of wrestling, he superseded it. He kept up in the ring until the very end, and now he's found a way to stay relevant long after the bell stops ringing. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and even hype the video. I appreciate any and all support that you guys give. I'm currently working on more videos in this series, as well as a couple other projects. So be on the lookout. Be sure to subscribe for more. Stay unchained, y'all.